Good morning, good morning. This is BlackAnthropy with your host and founder, Coffee, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio, produced by No Static Radio here in Cleveland, Ohio. And this morning we're going to have a very important conversation with a nonprofit organization, Promise of Democracy Foundation, founded by the current president, Mr. Greg Moore. And there's so much going on, and it's hard to digest this information, let alone synthesize what's going on, what's important, what changes are going on. And so I am grateful that Greg Moore accepted my invitation to come on and talk about some of these uh, numerous ongoing challenging issues that African American voters are facing in Ohio and around the country. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning, and thanks for having me, Coffee. Appreciate it.
Yes, I appreciate you coming on because, when I saw democracy in your name, the first thing I said is he's got to tell us what democracy means. But before we get to that, tell us what your organization is and why you founded it in 2009, and tell us when you founded it and why you founded this organization.
Well, first of all, thanks again for having me and for all the work you're doing to help lift up this issue. The Promise of Democracy Foundation I created right after the election of Barack Obama.
Okay.
I had spent a good chunk of my adult life working in voting rights. Worked in Cleveland here and across the state of Ohio, and then went to Washington in the mid-'80s to start working on voting issues, everything from the Jesse Jackson for President campaigns in 1984 and 1988, and then involved in voter registration reform. I tried to work for years to help change the laws that make it easier to register to vote. Now here in Ohio, it seems like that should be no problem, but around the country, it was hard to register to vote because only 26 states even had postcard registration. So you had to go downtown or have a registrar come to your event to get registered. So I worked on a bill called the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. We started working on it in 1988, and it really took us 5 years and some change to get it passed through Congress on a bipartisan basis. I need to add that because it was important that we thought you have to pass voting bills with bipartisan support. You just can't have one party, we thought. And we still believe that. So that went on for 5 or 6 years, and then the implementation of the laws. We were talking about this where you have laws that are created and then you have laws that have to be implemented. Well, those are two different things.
It is. I was at Pete Williams. Are you familiar with Pete Williams, the anchorman, correspondent?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
He was, Russ Mitchell moderated a conversation with him last week at John Carroll University in University Heights. And I attended that, and he talked about the new ethic rules that may be passed to govern the Supreme Court, the Supremes. And so I asked him, after you get through all your fancy conversation and insight, who's going to enforce it, and what does enforcement look like?
That's exactly.
And then I said, and you got attorneys writing it. And so he kind of said, well, the attorneys write everything, but attorneys don't write the rules that govern themselves. And that's the problem with the Supreme Court. They're going to write the rules that govern themselves. And
Right.
It is a completely different thing, what you said,
Yeah.
with implementing things versus
Exactly.
executing them.
And that takes, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. You the guest.
No, I mean, you hit it nail on the head. You think your battle is over.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you got to implement it. And then states can say, well, we don't like this part or that part. But we may not enforce all the way. Then you got to get the courts involved. Then you got to go through lawsuits. Then you have to go through implementation legislation in each state. And then you have to keep that up to date. So you see what happens. You now take one law, National Voter Registration Act, how we should have one law governing how we register people to vote. But then it took about 5 years to implement it. because it took place, we passed in 93, it took effect in 95, and we didn't see the results of it until 2000 because it takes about 5 years for it to kick in. So what happened 5 years after it was enacted? We had the 2000 election. The 2000 election saw a dramatic increase in the number of people registered. We registered, I don't have the exact number, but it was well over 50 million more people who got registered because of this one law. And so it led to this sort of explosion of people turning out in places like Ohio and Michigan and Florida.
Yeah.
Florida is the one that sticks out because that was the one where we had a very close election for president, and they was all tied to the voting machinery was out of date. We had thought about the registration part, but guess what? The infrastructure in our country wasn't ready to implement all those new people showing up. And so there were long lines, and it was all kinds of problems with the machines because they were outdated. And so we found out and discovered that, oh no, we changed the law so more people are registering, but now we have to change the apparatus of the voting system so more people can be accommodated. So from 2000 to 2004, we worked on a new law that would help standardize the way we count votes. It's called the Help America Vote Act. We worked on that. That passed in 2003, and we were able to have now a law that set up how we count votes, how you certify machines, how you determine how votes are counted, how voting systems are put in place, how election administrations are carried forth. So now, as you look at the calendar, we're getting closer to 2004 here in Ohio, and now we're about to hit the 20th anniversary of this coffee. So you'll see, I'm going to try to work to lift up some of the things that happened 20 years ago here in Ohio, because that's when we had the long lines, people, names not being on the list. We had issues with the voter suppression that went on, and it actually caused all these people to show up. Some people were in line for 2, 3, 4 hours, and they get there and say, "Oh, you're in the wrong line. You're in the right polling place, but the wrong precinct. Precinct B is over here on this side of the gymnasium."
Yeah.
So you got to go back to the back of the line and re-vote, or either cast a provisional ballot. So all these people were casting provisional ballots in Ohio. Students were in line at these colleges. So all of a sudden, again, we changed the law to make it easier to register. Then the apparatus of voting needed to be changed better. So to make a long story short, by the time we got to changing these laws, getting more people registered, and then fixing the administration election, and then some of the reforms that even happened in the 80s when Reverend Jackson ran for president to make it easier for people of color, then we got Barack Obama. So all that work had to happen first. And when he ran, many of the laws and the structures were in place so that it was now possible for an African American or a person of color to get elected president. So in 2009, I said, wow, okay, we've got all this work done. Let me create a foundation that I can help continue my work in this area. So that's why I built the Pharmaceutical Democracy Foundation in order to help carry on that work after many years of advocacy.
And I'll say thank you very much as a voter. I was listening to some conversation. I can't remember who. I find all of these different news journalists now, independent news journalists who have their YouTube channels and they on news channels, and they give real news and information, and they dissect the news and other parts of the news and helps you understand what's going on. And so Richard Wolff said, and he's an economist, and he said people take democracy for granted. And again, I thank you because we don't realize the people like you that are doing all of this work. It's sort of like what's going on with Cornel West, Dr. Cornel West, running for president. And there are a lot of people with opinions and thoughts and ideas about what he should be doing and what he isn't doing. And I raise that because people, unless and until you run for president, you probably should keep your lips together. Because one thing I love and I've learned is when a person doesn't give you the history of something, you probably need to give very short shrift to what they're saying. You're probably the only the second person that I have heard say all of the work that people like you did with Jesse Jackson campaign is what got Barack Obama elected. And people think that he just ran and won.
Yeah, no.
And that's what people think. And you're only the second person, and he hasn't been president in 8 whole freaking years. You know, and it's like, and people don't talk about the Jesse Jackson when he ran and all of the work that people like you did, and the work that you have to do the work to learn it. And that's the thing with Cornel West. I don't think that, you know, if Congress had any sense, they do him like Trump and make him be president, because he really don't want to be president. He wants to lay the foundation and do a blueprint to show these are all of the obstacles. These are the ones we encountered, and this is how we handle them. That's really what he's doing to me. He's not really wanted. I mean, God bless anybody 70-something years old who want to be president.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
You know, the last thing you want to be at 70 is the president
Yeah.
of the whole country. You know, and so that I got off my little soapbox. Again, the important thing that I'm trying to get across is all of the work, all of the hours, all of the days that it takes to do this, and the commitment that you have made to doing this. And like I said, Richard Wolff, he said this. He said, our democracy is under threat, and people take it for granted. Talk about what democracy is, Greg, please.
Well, democracy is still a work in progress. You know, it was created not here. It was created, I think, in ancient Greece. You know, democracy. Now, I'm not a political science professor yet.
Yeah.
One day I think I'm going to move to that. But, you know, it's been tried a lot of places around the world. And our constitutions, the oldest surviving constitutions, a lot of these attempts at democracy have been successful. Some have not. Some have failed. And some countries are still struggling with it. I think everybody's struggling with it.
Yes.
In our country, we've seen that it's been challenged a lot, particularly in the last few years. And so just to chronologically pick up, it was great to have an African American president. But it also opened up the door for a lot of voter suppression.
Yes.
So the people who wanted to see more people of color voting, more black people voting, more young people voting, more poor people voting, when all that happened, because he brought all those people in with him, it made a lot of folks nervous. So they just started unraveling what we were trying to do, state by state. And so it started. A lot of that stuff started in 2010. You remember the 2010 and 11 Tea Party movement. All that stuff was a reaction to the fact that America went and elected a black man as president. But also just like everybody needs to have health care. Oh, why was everybody so scared of that? People need to have access to education. People need to have adequate housing. All those things that people have been talking about in our democracy was finally starting to get done. Not that it didn't get done in the 60s. There were things going on. I'm just saying that the fact that we were making progress led to a retrenchment. So democracy has been challenged because, you know, the challenge to it in the Voting Rights Act was that, you know, we're going to make the law so that you can't do that. But the law I talked about came, you know, years after that. So democracy is being challenged when we create laws to help make it easier to vote or make it better to vote or more fair to vote. And then when there's forces that are trying to move in the opposite direction. So democracy is this fight between those forces who want more access to the ballot and those who want less access to the ballot. And we've been winning it up until recently. I believe that the laws have been making it easier to vote. But now, in the last 10 to 12 years, it's gone the other way.
And let's talk about that. The case, the 2013 case, again, during Barack Obama's presidency, the Shelby versus Holder, and talk about who Shelby is, or what Shelby is, and who Holder is. Well, and these things are brought in, and people may not realize that Holder, who he is, and why that suit was brought against Holder.
Right, and Holder was the Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, under President Barack Obama. The Shelby v. Holder decision was the Shelby County, Alabama, who challenged parts of the Voting Rights Act. And forgive me for skipping over the Voting Rights Act because that was the genesis of the Civil
And
Rights.
we're gonna get back to that. Yeah,
Right.
we're gonna get to that.
Right.
Or actually, you could talk about that first because that's the whole thing that they base their the case on is the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
And so talk about and again, you have the Voting Rights Act, but then like you're saying, the attacks when they came with Obama, it's like we need to do something about that that law that we passed, and that Shelby ended up gutting the major provisions in that.
Right. So going back to Jesse Jackson, his campaign was about enforce the Voting Rights Act.
Yes.
The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965.
I don't remember.
When Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement pushed to get that through, and there was a very bloody because there were problems in the South, particularly with people having poll taxes, people having literacy tests, people being asked to recite the Constitution, how many jelly beans are there in a jar, how many bubbles in a bar of soap. Those kind of questions were designed to just knock people out. When you walk in and get ready to vote, you'll get a literacy test. Poll taxes, have you paid this tax, have you paid that tax, checking the books. So your right to vote is not based on poll taxes, but that's what was going on in a lot of parts of the country. As well as just other things, inaccessible registrars, harder to get people registered to vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 put a stop to all of that, and it created a formula for states to be evaluated on which ones could be required to be have their laws pre-cleared by the Justice Department before they became law. That way, some of the things that the South had been doing had to get undone. So the initial number of states that were covered, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, some of these states had just egregious histories. But then there were other states that there were problems, like some parts of New York, some parts of some parts of North Carolina, some parts of Alaska. Parts of the country where Alaskan people, Native people, African American people, and then the Southwest, Texas, Arizona. Those places had enclaves of Latinos and Natives and Black people that were also being discriminated against. So the Shelby decision was the state of Alabama questioning whether or not they should still be required to have their laws pre-cleared by the state.
Wouldn't it be nice if I could just go in court and say, I want to challenge, should we still have traffic laws even though I was doing 80 miles per hour? Wouldn't it be nice if I could do that for all of the laws that I didn't like?
Just challenge it. And that's what they did.
Should we still have that law? I mean, cars go faster now.
That's what they did. And in 2013, right after the re-election of Barack Obama, Alabama went through their old ways and challenged it, and lo and behold, the Supreme Court in the 5-4 decision said, okay, the formula is out of date. We can no longer use this formula. Therefore, states are free to do what they want in certain areas of voting laws. That's how all these problems started.
And people don't realize all of these issues right now are all because of something that happened 10, 20, 30 years ago. And people just think that it just all of a sudden is starting to happen. No. And it's like, and that's again, a reason why I created BlackAnthropy is to shine a black light on organizations that are doing this work, because the flip side of this is organizations that are doing the opposite of what you're doing, like you said, that push and pull with democracy. There are organizations out there that are fighting against Voting Rights Act. And so when you think that, I never heard of the Promise of Democracy Foundation. Now just think how many other organizations you haven't heard of that are fighting against the work that organizations like you are doing. And we can get into that, like, the ultra rich guy that's, trying to take away the funding for the Black female entrepreneurs. I mean, people don't really hear about that, and so now let's get into the Shelby v. Holder, because the important part of that is what that decision that they made.
And let me just say, while we got a minute, it wasn't just the Promise of Democracy Foundation, because we just got started, but there was the NAACP and the Urban League, and there were all kinds of organizations that have been working for decades to get this done. That don't get a lot of credit either. But back to what they did, they basically gave states the freedom to go on and create laws without the need to pre-clear your laws. They said, well, you still have Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which says if you can prove discrimination happened, then we can go ahead and remedy it. But first, you have to have the law implemented, and the law has to take effect, and then you have to show there was a cause. Well, that makes a big difference. It puts a burden on the civil rights community to have to say, well, let's go find proof that there's discrimination, whereas we know there's discrimination, and then the cost and the time it takes to go through one lawsuit on one case could take 10, 8, 4, 3, 5 years, whatever, depending on what you're challenging, and it can be appealed. And so we went to Congress and said we need to have a new Voting Rights Act. And I was Chief of Staff of Congressman John Conyers, God rest his soul, who helped not only introduce the the Voting Rights Act, but the National Voter Registration Act too, and the bill to help fix the Voting Rights Act, the Voter Registration Advancement Act. And this law would have restored the Shelby decision. It would have restored the right of the federal government to establish standards for states being pre-cleared. It created a new formula. That was 2013 when the lawsuit came, and we put the bill forth in 2014, right about the anniversary of the Shelby decision. Well, just as we were starting to build some steam and to get that going, we're now in 2015. We're a few years away from the election. So we're like, we got to get this bill passed before the 2016 election, because if we don't, all kinds of things are going to be happening in the states. It's going to make it harder for the black vote and Latino vote and the young people to vote.
And the seniors.
And we had to hurry up and get it done. Well, we tried that. We had a big march. You may remember in Selma, Alabama, 15. There was a big march on the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. Barack Obama came to Selma, and all kinds of people. John Lewis was there. 80,000 people showed up. You couldn't even get into Selma. We were going to do this thing to get the Voting Rights Act back, and it was a lot of energy. And then came June of 2015 when Donald Trump announced he's running for president. And all of a sudden, the media and the attention and the energy that was going toward us getting that bill change just kind of evaporated. And everything was about Trump and possibly this celebrity might run for president. Well, I'm just trying to say the attention of Congress and a lot of our media just went to that. Forgot about the Voting Rights Act struggle we were trying to raise. And again, we tried to get it passed. It didn't happen. John Lewis, thankfully, a woman named Terry Soule, who's a congresswoman from Selma, Alabama, put together an even stronger bill to say, let's get this passed. But it was now 2016, and the laws had changed, and states were able to do what they wanted to do. And we kept warning people, if you don't protect the Voting Rights Act and enforce it, bad things can happen. And guess what? Bad things happened in 2016. Not because the Voting Rights Act itself wasn't implemented, but because the attention of the country moved away from the need to make sure everybody's vote was counted. I think it helped contribute to the election of Donald Trump. And at that point, we were not able to. He didn't win the popular vote, by the way. I should mention that. Neither did.
It didn't matter because that wasn't the point. The point was to get out of the news any talk and conversation about the Voting Rights Act, and to put on there a complete distraction. As I continue to say, he's a complete distraction. There's just absolutely no reason on earth. I mean, it's like me having you on this show. No Static Radio having you on the show every hour for the rest of this year, next year, and the year after. I mean, and it just makes no sense. And it's like it's not news anymore. We get it, and so with that decision, once other states saw that, again, like people are not realizing a lot of these issues, once they saw that, and I'm a big finance person, so when people wonder where fees and all of this stuff come from, it comes from 2008, Too Big to Fail. And it really comes before that, Black-Scholes model, and it really comes before that, when corporations were not allowed to fail. And so the bankers realized they wouldn't let Ford and them fail in the Depression and all these other things. And so, we can do that. We can spend all the money we want, and Congress is going to bail us out. And so now when you look at most of your bills, whether it's a service you're getting, utilities, and all of these fees, it's because they just adopted the Wall Street model that, oh, well, we can do whatever we want and nobody's going to do anything to us. And that's exactly what's happening with this voting rights decision in 2013 in Shelby versus Holder. All the states start doing the same thing. And they're continuing to do this same thing. They're continuing to say, we're gutting all of these different laws, and not only that, this redistricting. Talk about what redistricting and gerrymandering is.
Well, redistricting, the battle of redistricting goes back to the Voting Rights Act. Yep. It's the fact that the amendments in 1982 allowed there to be majority-minority districts created where there was a population of people, either language minority, racial minority, who could get their influence strengthened because of the numbers of people who's in that jurisdiction, in that area. And so the gerrymandering that has been taking place is not new. Politicians have been drawing these lines for years to make sure they get reelected. But there were laws that were put in place that's in some states where we've reformed that. Some states create citizens commission, like California. Mm-hmm. California has it's a majority-minority state. Yeah. They have a citizens commission. They draw the lines. It's not based on politicians. So they have a very multicultural legislature, very multicultural congressional legislature, because they've been able to use a citizens-centered commission. Now, I was working on redistricting last year, a couple of years. I'm sorry to keep going into more detail, but the census are done every 10 years. And so we knew that the census of 2020 was very important. So the 2020 census told us who lives here, where you live, what jurisdictions they're from. But then the lines are drawn based on the census. So we spent a whole year just getting people to sign census form. That was a whole campaign with Cleveland Votes and the Ohio Census Advocacy Coalition. But the way this works is that the politicians got in the middle of it and basically said, well, we want to draw the lines. And it's supposed to be based on the results of the last election, the last 10 years. Well, in Ohio, it was like 56% of people across the state voted for Republicans over the last 10 years. And 44% voted for Democrats. 46% voted for Democrats. So we said, under the law, congressional delegation should reflect 46%. That's what the law said. But the Republicans here in Ohio, looking at the same law, says, no, we want to keep our supermajority, which is 66% or 60% of 100% of the seats. That's, congressional and that. And we were like, no, it should be drawn based on the law. We got together in Ohio and passed, after 4 attempts, legislative and congressional redistricting reform, 2015 and 2018. I helped even negotiate some of the stuff in the 2018 package so that there would have to be a bipartisan sign-off of these laws. Well, the Republicans in this state, like we were talking about earlier, in other states, they know the Voting Rights Act is not being enforced. Yep. They're like, we're not the South. We can do what we want to do. And that's basically what they did. They ignored Supreme Court rulings, Ohio Supreme Court rulings. They ignored the Ohio Constitution, and they just basically wrote laws that put themselves back in power at a supermajority where they can override or veto by even a governor. This supermajority has been in place for a couple years now, and the point I'm making is that the redistricting battle is just a byproduct of the Voting Rights Act struggle. It's basically taken so many of the laws that we have on the books, so many of the intent of the laws, so many of the court rulings, and just saying, no, we'll do what we want to do anyway. So I was asked to be head of the Ohio Citizens Redistricting Commission last year.
I have a caller.
Yeah, don't worry about it. They hung up.
Oh, damn. I'm sorry.
Okay.
We get them back.
Okay.
Let me know. Now I'll be glad to stop talking. Give myself a break. But yeah, so that's what.
Caller, if you're still listening, please call back in. We'll take your call as soon as you call back in.
Okay.
Go ahead, Greg.
I wish they would. Yeah. So redistricting is a problem. we are now in this place where redistricting is becoming the next big battle. And even though we got the Supreme Court ruling in our favor, it did stop them from doing what they're doing here in Ohio. So again, it comes back to the Voting Rights Act, comes back to our democracy. This is a threat to our democracy when people can actually say we have control over the political system, and no matter what the citizens of Ohio say, we're going to keep going forward.
Now, one interesting thing about that is, I knew that it was going to be struck down by the Supreme Court, because effectively, if the Supreme Court doesn't strike it down, what do you need a Supreme Court for? Because the states will start, the state legislatures that are controlled by whichever party will start to implement laws and say that, as you just said, our law is more supreme than the governor, and who cares what the Supreme Court of the United States says, because our decisions override what they've said.
Yeah,
and we don't have to follow the law. And again, that's my question to Pete Williams. We can talk about all of the fancy laws and rules that the U.S. Supreme Court will implement. It's just like you said. You have the state legislatures. Who's going to enforce the laws against them? And that's exactly the situation that we have here. And people don't really realize that the state legislatures are the ones that have gotten a stranglehold on this power, and they're not interested in relinquishing it. But some states are starting to make that difference and make that change, starting with like Wisconsin. They're saying no, you know, it got so brazen during the last election where someone ran saying, if we get in, a Democrat will never win again. And they were so confident from what they do that they thought that they could just outright say it, because the courts continue to uphold this stuff. And so now, a part of your mission for Promise of Democracy Foundation includes providing education through research and the arts in low-income African American communities that promote democratic values and electoral participation. Talk about some of the educational programs and educational things you do. So like you said, you all did things in 2015 and 18. Talk about some of the programming and events that you did as part of your education program.
Well, I created another organization called the Ohio Voter Fund, and that was basically designed to give me a grassroots organization across the state that could do voter registration for the most part. We did voter guides, and over the years we used to have a community newspaper called the Ohio Community News that we did in conjunction with a publisher here, Charles Huffman. But he's gone on to be with the Lord. But the idea is that we create voter guides, or that we distribute voter guides. League Women Voters sometimes do them. We now work with the Cleveland Observer to put articles in there about the issues that are important to everyone in the community. We also do mailings. We may mail you a letter. If we register you to vote, we'll send you a letter saying, hey, these issues are important. Go ahead and, turn out and vote. Hey, the laws just changed. Here's what you need to know to bring the right kind of ID. We may send a text message to people saying, don't forget to vote. This is early vote time. Try to get in there early. We also might just go door to door and try to get people to show up. And that's been done in not so much recently, but in the years like 2008, 2016. Those were the kind of years where you have large groups of community people who we would hire to just knock on their neighbors' doors and say, make sure you vote. Or, you didn't vote last time, but here's a good time to vote. Mm-hmm. So we were doing, mail. We were doing, we weren't doing a lot of media because a lot of other people were doing media, but we were doing like the grassroots stuff. So, door-to-door canvassing, voter registration, voter guides, distribution of voter guides, text messaging. And then, COVID hit, and then a lot of that stuff we were doing outside just got, stopped. And then we lost a lot of people. We just said, I don't want to do that anymore. It's too much crime out here. So some of that, because we're kind of smaller than most groups, we don't do as much now. So things like the radio station here we're doing. And I might, write more. I wrote a book.
Yeah, we're going to get into that.
Yeah, so I do things like that and talking, bookstores and high schools when I can get in, colleges, but just get out in the community and try to get people, and then partnerships. I don't want to leave that out.
Right, that's the big
Partner
thing.
with people who are working in your same area, and that's a good way to do our work as well.
And that's another thing people don't realize. Again, there's multiple organizations on both sides doing a lot of this work, and that's a way how the work is done and sustained over a period of time is using that the knowledge shared across the organization, sharing the time that it takes to do this. And when you're documenting all of this, it leaves a trail for other people to follow. Like you say, when people were burned out, looking for something to do, decided for whatever reason they didn't want to do it, you still at least had the stuff that you all were doing, so that you could pass it down and share it amongst other people. And it also provide an opportunity for other people to do like you and start their own organization, grassroots organization, doing similar work. And so one big thing that I'd like for you to talk about too, and you started out talking about, you touched on this when you first started out, is, politics almost, has these nuances like law, and specifically criminal law versus civil law. And a big thing to me for voting is understanding local politics versus national politics. And again, people think that, I don't know, it's interesting to me when people think the president, inflation is high in the president, but these things are happening because of the local laws just as much as the national laws and stuff. So talk a little bit about the difference, like you said, the work you all did at the national level, and then when you went to work in D.C. for years. Talk about what national voting and laws look like versus what federal laws and so forth look like.
Well, you hit it perfectly, that this is happening on both ends. It's not just what's happening in Ohio, it's national. So these laws are sometimes conflicting with each other. Sometimes that's what some of these lawsuits are all about. They may have one federal standard that's not being implemented right at the state level, or you may have a federal standard, a state law that may conflict with what the federal protections might be. So that's the back and forth we do. Groups like the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU, and others, they're in court all the time over these laws. So that's the dynamic. We got people who are playing that role in the litigation side, people like the NAACP and others who are doing the voter registration and issue advocacy. And then you have groups that are just looking at trying to get people motivated, and people like yourself and No Static Radio, all those people who are trying to get information out. Is this own campaign and crusade. We don't always work as coordinated as we should, but the idea is that there's other outlets that you can do some of this work. People will vote based on how they're motivated, how they feel about the candidate. But also, think about all the people who had to vote in the 60s, didn't have no black candidates to vote for. They just had
their whole life.
Yeah, their whole life they just voted because it was a right to vote. So we have to be cognizant of the things happen at the federal level that may affect people's mind and how they're thinking about it. But then the things at the state level are kind of like being done quietly. The counties or the cities or the states are just passing laws constantly, as we were talking about earlier, and you just can't keep up with it. So how do you expect the voter to keep up with it? If we're advocates, we can barely keep up with it. So the idea is just to keep people informed, keep people energized. Don't let them get too discouraged by this talk. One thing I do caution against is people saying, "Oh, the laws are so bad, my vote's not going to count." And so, we like to say, no, your vote matters. No matter what happens, you just vote. Don't get discouraged. Don't think the laws are being too stacked against you. There's ways we can get out of this if we keep our eyes on the prize, as they say, and keep going. So it's a two-pronged fight. It's a federal and it's a state fight. And then locally, you guys got to make sure. Be great if some of our local folks would do more, elected people, to get the vote out, get the word out, because people looking at TV, they're watching what's happening in Washington, or what's happening in Columbus, but what's happening here in Cleveland or Youngstown or Akron. That's where it happens. So whether it's laws about police accountability, or laws about fair housing, or laws about clean water, all that stuff, environmental laws, criminal justice laws, all that's done by local and county governments and state governments. So you may have one overriding law that's protecting certain rights, but then these other enforcement laws are being done at the county and local level. So all those entities, it's a lot of government
Yes.
to deal with, right?
Yeah.
State, county, and local, that's too much. Then you have even smaller.
Yeah.
Homeowners associations or whatever. You have all kinds of areas of governance that makes democracy pretty complicated in this country. So you can't blame people for being confused or for just clocking out. But if you clock out, that's kind of what they want you to do.
That's exactly what they want you to do. And the most important thing you have to understand is the same way you got in there and you learned over the years. That's what it takes, because this stuff is going to affect your life. Whether or not you participate in it, it's not going to stop. It's not going to go away. Like you said, democracy is something that is always in process. It is not a guarantee. They say that we have a democracy, that we live in a democracy, but it is what kind of democracy and what kind of democracy does different classes of people get, because there's a difference there. Now, and that's one thing I would like for you to clarify too, is your organization, when you say nonpartisan, what does that mean? Because you're not saying vote Democrat or vote Republican or vote Green Party or Liberation Party. You're saying nonpartisan. We want you to participate and understand what's going on. And so that, so that's what you're getting at there. What about the Ohio Civic Education Project? Were you a part of that?
Ohio Civic Education Project?
Yes.
That's part of it. It sounds like what we were doing when we first got started. We were working on keeping the civic education going. But that's part of a large Midwest civic education effort. We were trying to go into Michigan. Michigan, by the way, did a great job of citizens reform and got their redistricting.
Yeah, like you say, you got John Conyers there who, grew up with the civil rights movement and all of that. So again, he understood, and it was his time to lead that charge. Now that a lot of the other people are not there anymore, and again, he learned a lot about what that process looks like and the commitment and attention and that you need to have, and the people that you need to surround yourself with.
Yeah, and that was remember the big fights in the civil rights movement was in Chicago and Detroit, and Cleveland. That's where all the happenings was going on, with all the problems that we were having with people in the streets. So this legacy we have here in Cleveland through the Stokes brothers and through the work that was done over the years with people like Otis Moss and Arnold Pinckney, that's not really replicated all over the country and not all over the Midwest even. But it is in Chicago with Operation Push Reverend Jackson. It was with John Conyers in Detroit. It was with the Stokes brothers here in Cleveland. You can go down the list.
Yes.
Some of the Mitchell brothers in Detroit and Baltimore. So it's these cities that were driving a lot of the reform and the changes that were happening. So me, I'm saying I have a history of partisan politics. I work for the Democratic Party, and I work for a Democratic member of Congress named John Conyers as his chief of staff. But that doesn't mean I can't be nonpartisan now.
Right.
All right. So everything I'm saying now, I'm doing it for the sake of people to vote no matter what your party is. All right. I'm not saying vote for Democrat. I'm saying vote to maximize your voice. Make sure Cleveland's represented. Fill out the census form so Cleveland gets more representation. Make sure urban people and young people have voting rights. Make sure college students aren't forced to stand in line. You can vote for whoever you want to. I have my own views, right? But I'm just saying, let's make it easier for you to vote. Let's stop the barriers from coming on and do it in a nonpartisan basis. Let me just tell you, the reason we don't have the Voting Rights Act problem fixed now is because every single bill passed by Congress on the Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1975, the Voting Rights Act of 1982, 92, and 2006 were all passed on a bipartisan basis, and were all passed by Republican presidents, except for Lyndon Johnson. He did the first one. They're bipartisan. So this idea that this is just for Democrats is crazy. There's no such history.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
It's all imagination. But when you make it partisan, and people say, well, only the Democrats support voting rights, Republicans shouldn't be able to get away with saying, well, your history is that you supported voting rights up until 2007. I'm sorry, up until 2013, because you all passed hit in 2006. That wasn't that long ago.
And again, that's why, from my perspective, when a person talks, I don't care what they're talking about. If you're not getting a historical context, you need to either, do that research yourself, and find someone and some sources that give you that historical perspective that catches you up to that moment that you're at.
I'm
Again,
glad you're doing that too, because most people don't. They'll just start about what's on the news
and
today.
I think that that's what's happening.
And the fact that you're doing that is a really good thing. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I mean, the work that you do, again, we take this stuff for granted. You're listening to the BlackAnthropy radio show produced in Cleveland, Ohio by No Static Radio. This morning, our guest is Greg Moore, founder and president of Promise of Democracy Foundation, voter rights advocacy group, doing work to ensure that African Americans get the information they need to vote, learn about voting, and you wrote a book, right? And again, when you have this kind of knowledge, that's what makes it kind of easy to write a book. There's a such thing as easy, but because then, you have the knowledge and the information, but then the structure of putting the book together and what goes where becomes a challenge. But you have a book, Beyond the Voting Rights Act, the untold story of the struggle to reform America's voting registration laws. So talk about why you wrote that book.
Well, I can say it's because of the discussion we had today. What we talked about today is what that book is about. It's trying to draw some thread, needle and threading those things that happened over the last 30 years to what's happening today. Because I started working on this book in the 90s. I was just like, I wouldn't even say it's a book. I just wanted to write down what was happening.
Right.
And the laws that were happening. I kept keeping notes and kept holding on to little documents and program booklets and all that. And then I had been doing this work for so long, I never stopped and took a break. But I did get asked. I was on a forum on the 2020 election on an international forum about democracy.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about it. And one of the writers, one of the people on there was a publisher. And after the show was over, it was a Zoom, it was COVID. But it was like, all these different countries on it. They were talking about the election results. Well, my show happened to come on. My panel was on the Saturday after the November election. Mm-hmm. That was the day that they declared Joe Biden the actual president. It was 4 or 5 days before the election. So after the show was over, everybody was hearing our perspective on why we think that we were able to win. Well, I would say now that we're able to have a successful election, not able to win, I better say it right. Why we had a successful election. He asked, I just said casually, I've been trying to get this book published and talk about some of these issues, but I just never got around to actually getting it finished. Well, he says, well, are you looking for a publisher? And I said, well, not really. I won't publish it one day. So he said The Order Press, which is an international publishing company, and then he offered, Matt Walthrop offered to publish, to edit it and be a publisher. And I said, okay, let's do it.
Oh, wow.
And it took me, from 2020, December, till I guess September of 2022, I spent working and editing and writing and rewriting and cutting. Yeah. So the promise of the book was originally called Fulfilling the Promise of Democracy, because it kind of fit with my foundation. But after they read the book, they said, this is actually about fulfilling the work beyond the Voting Rights Act, because that was more succinct. That was about voter registration laws and what happened. So they asked me, and my book originally ended with the election of Barack Obama. I was good and happy. Right? We had got black folks, and so they said, no, go all the way through what happened afterwards. So I had to continue writing all the way through what happened. I stopped in January of 2021 after the election. But I had to write it. So I took a lot of stuff I had written about my life and my work, from Cleveland all the way through the 88 campaign. They took all that out. Well, I took it out because it was too long. Yeah. So one day there'll be another book about all the stuff that led up to that. So Beyond the Voting Rights Act tells the story of what we just been talking about today. All those things that were threaded together to create the situation we have right now in our laws, and giving people a chance to see that democracy is fragile, and but it's resilient too.
Yes,
It's like
it is.
rubber. Yeah, it's going to bend.
Yeah.
And it's going, but I don't think it's going to break. Now, it's failed in other countries. It's failed in other times. But our country survived the Civil War. We survived the World War II. We survived COVID. I think our democracy can survive what we're going through now. But I have to tell you, it's not going to be fun or easy to do this.
No, it's not. And I think one reason that even when our democracy, like you say, it bends and folds and goes through these ebbs and flows, I think that to some extent it's because of capitalism. And when the powers that be see that their money is impacted, then they make a change and they make a difference.
Right.
They do things, and so with all of these union and worker strikes and so forth. And listen, again, I've watched finance for decades, and 25 years ago, at my work, we were saying this is excess compensation. Way before wages got, and I just watched over 20 something years and said, what is it going to take for people to realize the multi millions of dollars that these executives and so forth make? What is it going to take for people to realize that everything that you do on your phone, a lot of these executives on the board of each other, and they all implement law agreements to share people's information. I mean, this stuff that just doesn't happen in a vacuum. And but the easier people feel like the easier they make it, the phones and these things to operate and do some of these things, that they're okay. And it's just surprising to me how long it has taken people to wake up to what's happening with real wages and income in this country. Is just so surprising. That's always going to be my soapbox, is finance and economics. Talk about your background, and that's something I always like people, my guests, to talk about, because we think sometimes you hear a person and you think that oh well, he did this and this person helped him and that's how he got where he was. And you've talked about a lot of it so far, talking about working on Jesse Jackson campaign. But talk about your background and what got you into this work, gave you this passion for this work that you're doing.
Well, I appreciate the question too, because most people don't ask me that.
Yeah.
But I grew up here in Cleveland. Went to Cleveland Public Schools, Moses Cleveland, John F. Kennedy High School, Robert H. Jameson High School, junior high school, which doesn't exist anymore, I guess. But I was here, and I was like everybody else. School desegregation came, and there was a lot of fear about what was going to happen back then. It was this is the 70s. I left Ohio. I went to Ohio University and got involved in student government and got involved in registering students to vote. But here, it was more like I was a little kid canvassing, because a woman named Corrine Henderson, who was on my street, was a block captain, and she worked for, I can't believe the person's name, but for Mel Whalen. And she had me passing out literature, knocking on people's doors in junior high school, saying, get out and vote. So that's how I got started with this, and knew the door-to-door area. So I knocked on doors from maybe 14 and 20. Just that's all I did was canvassing. But when I went to Ohio University, I started seeing there was like a collection of students there. They were kind of all centered in this one little town, and then all around the town was all this rural Appalachian folks. It was a little bit less progressive, a lot less progressive, but that campus was very strong and progressive. So I got involved there with the Black Student Union, the anti-apartheid movement. I got involved in voter registration, Black Studies programs, retention. And I got active in Ohio Student Association at the time, and we started fighting against these cuts to education. So I started pushing for students to register across the state. We went to Kent State, and Cincinnati, and Youngstown. We would just get Cleveland State, getting people to get registered and stop these cuts that were being proposed. And then people heard about what was going on in Ohio and Washington, and I got asked to run for a group called the U.S. Student Association. I didn't even know there was such a thing. So it was a National Student Association. Used to be involved. It used to be called NSA. And they asked me to run for president, And I was like, well, okay, but I don't really know much about national politics.
Right, yeah.
But I did end up winning. When we were in Atlanta, and we had an election down there, so I won this election. So here I am, like 3 or 4 years out of Cleveland Public Schools, all of a sudden I'm running this national student organization. And then that's how I met Jesse Jackson and Coretta King. We started working on the King holiday. We started working on voter registration with the Jackson campaign. And we started working on cuts to education, same issue. Reagan was cutting all these student financial aid programs. And that's the only reason I went to school was student financial aid. I had a full student financial aid package. And so I was fighting for financial aid. And the way to do that was to register students and vote. So when I got involved with his campaign, I was able to see all the voting barriers that there were. So I worked with him to try to get some of those barriers fixed. And because of his campaign, I was able then to, and I met John Conyers during his campaign, and a lot of other people, not just John Conyers, Congressional Black Caucus, and Lou Stokes and others who were working on that stuff. And that is how I got involved with this voter registration reform movement. So I was very reluctantly doing this. I was not like, let me go out here and be a national leader, let me go out here and work for my rep. I was just kind of moving along with what I was doing, but not really making a big wave or trying to make a lot of money. It was just, pre-internet, pre-cell phones. We would just organize. And so I just kept going. I never stopped. I didn't really stop. And it took me up until, all this time just to understand how these laws were all fitting together. So when I wrote the book, it helped me to sort of synthesize my experience. And I was able to say, okay, here is why this is connected to everything else. But if I don't write it down, I don't think people will understand it. So you can understand it in a vacuum, but if you put it together. And so my background is really, I grew up right in Mount Pleasant, and now, I'm pretty much back in Ohio. I still have to go back and forth to Washington because there's a lot of work still to be done there too. But my idea is to just come back here, Cleveland, and just be here. But I do a lot of work with my, with the Ohio University. We have an Ebony Bobcat Network. A lot of Black alumni stay involved and stay connected. We're fighting against these crazy laws now that are happening to try to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
That's a big thing.
So you see, Coffee, it never stops.
It never ends.
It just keeps going. And so all I did was keep going. Whatever battle there was, I kept going. And then the book talks a lot about how it doesn't, unfortunately, we had to cut the part out about how I got started. So one day I do want to have a book that talks about my experience in Cleveland and how Ohio affected my work nationally. But right now, there's so much going on in Ohio. I just feel that we got to get this right here because these folks act like they don't read the same Constitution. And so as long as there's a battle, I'll still be here. But, we have things falling apart in Washington. So it just keeps me kind of still involved there. So I go back and forth quite a bit, which is why it's hard to sometimes schedule because I'm always in and out. But I've been fighting this battle for a long time, and at some point I guess I'll slow down and just teach, which would be good. Maybe write another book. Maybe work on, voter education, whatever. But it's just a lot of work. I just hopefully can help change things, but help give some inspiration to other people who are kind of discouraged. You've been doing this for 30 years and 35 and 40. You think you're tired. I'm kind of a little bit slower than I used to be, but it is rewarding work. But you just gotta stick with it and don't be discouraged.
Yeah, and the thing is, what you just said there. It never ends, and
unfortunately.
It never ends. It's always something coming, and when people don't think that voting is important, it's important because the other side of the coin is they're not going to say, okay, good, they don't vote, so we can treat them any kind of way. It's going to be, people have to understand, like, you got rich people who they just don't have enough money, and they're always going to be pursuing, okay, I got, $1 billion, but I don't have $1,050,000,050.
Exactly.
And that's the same with this stuff. People are going to say, okay, well, they can't do this, or this, or this, but they're going to say, okay, and we don't want them to do this, 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 or this. They're going to just continue to make up stuff. And if people are not out there doing this work, paying attention to it and bringing it to the forefront and pushing back against it, then people don't realize that, again, that democracy is always under attack and that voting is one answer to that. And not just voting for anyone, and especially when you look at like nowadays, like here in Cleveland, Signal Cleveland has started to cover all of the city council meetings. Those are on YouTube. They're streamed live. They do snippets of all of that. They even are always looking for people to learn how to write and do this work to cover these meetings. They teach you, they train you how to do this stuff. You make a living, and it's really eye opening when you get involved with Signal Cleveland and learn like, wow, I didn't realize all this was going on. And when you see a new building pop up somewhere, it's not some rich person just went and bought some land or bought a building that's going to do something. They've got to go through city council. They've got to put a whole team together and explain and justify what they're doing and why. And then what happens is you see the difference between, a small entrepreneur, they go in with the same idea, then, you look like, wow, something about this doesn't seem right. And so you need people to help guide you and explain to you what this process is and to say, why is it this challenging and difficult when you don't have, a multi-billion dollar, corporation behind you? But information is way more accessible now than it used to be. And another thing that I think I see is a lot of, again, journalists who have worked for legacy news outlets, broadcasting companies, and media outlets, and they're saying, I'm going to do my own show to tell it the way I want to tell it. And that is very important. That's why I always ask guests. I hope it never comes a day where I have a guest on and I don't have them talk about their background, because that is the most important thing, is understanding, doing what you have a passion to do, doing and following that path that you're being led down, even though you may not be sure why you're doing this, or when it comes to you. And I'm not, I don't mean easy in the sense that you knew everything to do and all, but it was laid right there for you, and you had, people pushing you and promoting. When people want you to do something and have an interest in you doing something, follow along for a little bit until you can see, okay, wow, I see why they want me to do this, and because you just learn so much that you never thought that, you would learn before. One thing I definitely want you to talk about, growing up seeing Jesse Jackson run for president, and like when I look at Jesse Jackson presidential run, I mean, you just look like, wow, how did we miss that? How did he not become president? Talk about, the work you did and your experience working with him, and then being able to work with John Conyers after that.
That's a really good question. Can I say one thing before we do that?
Yes.
I was a journalism major, and one time I was at something called radio television journalism. And my whole thing was just to be a journalist, to write articles and work for a newspaper. So what you all are doing here with the, no static radio, to me, is like way beyond anything I would have believed was possible. Even because it's always like a big studio and a big newspaper.
Yes.
That's the only way you're going to be successful. But the fact that y'all been able to pull this together with your show and other shows, it just is a good example of the kind of thing that I would never have dreamed of. So to me, that's a good thing. I just wanted to make sure I say that.
And the biggest thing, I'm not trying to be famous by Friday.
That's right.
It's like, get people on, get their perspective, and get it out there what they're doing, and have a base for people to go to and learn about organizations like yours, BlackAnthropy.com, and No Static Radio YouTube channel.
Yeah, absolutely. But going back to Jesse Jackson and John Conyers, they both, of course, worked together like many other people. But and Lou Stokes too was in that.
Yes.
So I never worked for him. I did, and learned a lot from him, and got a chance to meet him often, as well as Stephanie Tubbs Jones. But And when I worked with Reverend Jackson, he was the head of Operation Push.
I grew up on 48th and Drexel.
Oh, you did? Okay, well.
So you know where
I know what
Operation
you're
Push on
talking about,
49th and Drexel.
So we were at Push all the time.
Yep.
Every Saturday he had his
when Barack
program.
Obama lived in Chicago, it's 2 blocks from there.
Yeah, so we were there. Even though I lived in Washington at the time, I was always at work for him.
Yep.
Now I volunteered for 4 years.
Every Saturday morning we get out there like, Jesse and them down there,
And he ran for president first time, and it was like a fluke. You know, people were like, well, yeah, this is a nice symbolic thing, but the fact that so many people was turning out and there was so much energy.
Yep.
I mean, we would go to events and there'd be 500, 800 people at his events, and these other people running for president would have 200 people or 100 people. People were coming out, black and white, brown. Everybody was coming out to see him and just to hear him.
So it's not nothing new that people want to change.
Yeah,
want
they
something
want
different. They want a different perspective. They don't want some career politician in there.
No,
this stuff is not new.
No, but
that's why I wanted you to talk about it.
But he was
you
speaking
brought it
to
up.
the power. He did the economic message around the Black Expos.
That's the biggest thing I remember. That's the biggest thing I wanted to talk about.
All that stuff.
And Chicago still has them.
Yeah, but they were big at one time, and particularly in the Midwest. They were here all the time. You know, so he was doing the, say no to drugs for the high school kids. He would do rallies, push, excel. And those things were like in the high schools and get people motivated. Remember Moss was active here too, I think I remember. So that's where I knew them was from Push. But then Push, when he ran for president, he created the National Rainbow Coalition. Mm-hmm. And I was one of his first board members. I was representing students because I was his national student leader, quote unquote. But then that whole movement kind of blossomed into this voting rights, peace and justice, social justice. We talked about anti-apartheid, peace in the Middle East, no use of nuclear weapons. That's all you heard in the 80s and the 90s. Yeah, don't hear that anymore. And stop putting money into the military, human needs, get rid of this whole idea, the idea of welfare, people, being, he basically talked economics, political, social justice in the middle of a presidential campaign. That never happened before. Yep. And then he got to speak at the convention. And that was the first time a black man spoke at a full keynote, that address, and you could hear a pin drop at that convention. And all the time, we're just watching this thing grow. Then he did it again. Yeah. But so we had to build a structure between 2004 and 2008. And Reverend it's just an inspirational leader. Yes, he was. We just celebrated his 35th anniversary of the 88 campaign. But next year is the 40th anniversary of his 84 campaign. And we want to honor him. The convention for the Democratic Party is going to be in Chicago. We hope that the convention, we're working to get the convention to honor him 40 years later, because he's had some serious health challenges now. Yes. But he always had health challenges, even, while doing some of this work. It was wearing him out. I was with him. I was travel with him, and, he would do 10, 12 events a day. He'd wake up at 4:30 in the morning and keep going until about 8, 9 o'clock at night. And he would do high schools, churches, business meetings. And he was just an unbelievable force of nature. And he just worked hard at it. And he worked us hard, too. And so I did 9 years with him. And so I was there with him as a volunteer for 4 years and then on staff. He had me lead up his citizenship education fund. So that's what I did. And we were headquartered in Washington, so I had to go back and forth between Washington and Chicago almost every week. For some reason, we had to have in-person meetings all the time, so we didn't have Zoom, so we get to
right. Oh yeah.
So I knew him and Mrs. Jackson and Jesse Jr. and Jonathan.
Right.
Congressman Jonathan was the chair of our board at the time. But he introduced me to people. Percy Sutton and all the celebrities knew him. Isaac Hayes.
Right.
He had all these celebrities and people who were just, we all know their names, but they were believing in social justice.
Oh, yeah.
So John Conyers was one of those members of Congress from Detroit.
Yes.
Him and his brother were running cars. They were selling cars, Conyers Ford,
Mm-hmm.
But they were actively involved in the same thing. Remember Detroit?
Oh, yeah.
And the riots they had there. And so he was a lawyer, ran for Congress, and he started pushing for the King holiday.
Oh,
the
yeah.
day Dr. King died, the next day he introduced a bill to make that bill a holiday.
Yeah.
Well, from 1968 to 1984, it took that long.
And people don't realize, like Stevie Wonder and all of them were involved in that. And
we marched in January.
Yeah, people don't realize that. I mean, it's like if you go back, it's unreal. The same way you can listen to Marvin Gaye's Inner City Blues, the Harold Melvin and Blue Notes, Wake Up Everybody. You know, if you watch Jesse Jackson's, like you say, his campaign speeches,
Yeah.
and when he spoke, it is unreal. Like you say, how 30, 40 years ago, that struggle, those struggles still exist. I mean, you can listen to Inner City Blues, and it feels like Marvin Gaye, made that song last Friday.
Yeah.
And
Curtis Mayfield and
yeah,
what's the other guy who gave us like Donny Hathaway?
Yeah.
They were all friends with him, and they would so when they died or people like that would die, it was like a really big thing, like a family member would die. But they were singing songs about this movement.
And not only that, even when you look at the his stature around the world, they completely leave out, and it's not talked about. And when I say they, I mean media. There's very little, if any, coverage about. Remember when these girls, people would get, kidnapped in other countries? They called Jesse Jackson.
Yeah.
He wasn't a political, whoever or whatever, and he negotiated these deals, with other countries to bring American citizens back home.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's like, so, and a lot of people, like now, I think something came out, he may have been an FBI informant and all of these other things. When Jesse Jackson ran, it was clear that that man had an agenda, an American agenda that would benefit everyone and definitely black people. He wasn't afraid to speak what he thought and what he wanted. When he talked, you didn't get this feeling of where politics is now, that he said it but he wouldn't do it when he get in there. Because really, when you look at my estimation, when I look at Dick Cheney, he worked in government, being over the State Department and over the Defense Department. And when he became president, to me, he basically put his foot on Congress' throat and said, "You incompetent bastards aren't going to breathe for 4 years." And once it got so good to him, he stepped on it again and said, "You ain't going to breathe for 8. And you're going to give me what I want. I don't care about this other nonsense you're doing." And I always felt that's how Jesse Jackson would have been as president. You can do what you want to do for the Defense Department, but you're going to do this for these communities and these people on these issues.
Oh yeah, and Reverend insisted there be a rainbow coalition, that you have black, brown, urban, rural, Latino, Native American. That's who made up his organization.
Yeah.
And so we were in rooms with people we're not that comfortable with because black organizers. But then, we learned to appreciate them and bring them into the coalition.
Because that's what you got to have.
Yeah, he said if we want to grow, and that's the Rainbow Coalition was not what the Democratic Party looked like at the time. Remember?
Right.
We put that in place at the party because it was living outside of it. And so I think diversity, way before diversity, equity, inclusion existed, he was talking about that.
Right.
And economic justice, like he was saying, making this economic system work for everybody was what he was talking about. And even the peace and justice work we were doing, it was a controversial to say apartheid is wrong.
Right.
Divest your money from a place that practices apartheid. So it was something. And God bless him, and I hope he continues to heal. But let's give him his propers for, his years from Martin Luther King on.
Okay, I know you got to get out of here, and I do want to thank you so much for coming on and talking about this important issue and the important work that you're doing to, as one of the, leader organizations here in Cleveland, and that's impacting, all of the United States with this voter registration and the importance of voter registration and keeping alive these Senate bills and the state legislatures that are being passed that we need to take serious and be paying attention to and do our part on them. Tell people where they can find the Democracy Foundation.
PromiseOfDemocracy.org, where you can get all the information about what we're trying to do in general through the foundation, but we also work very closely with the Ohio Voter Fund. So go to us, Ohio Voter Fund Facebook page, Instagram and Twitter, X. But anyway, that's where you can see a lot of the work that I'm doing in Columbus. We're doing it in Columbus, in Cleveland, and the fight to help turn out the vote and help get people aware. I hope everybody gets registered before the deadline. Maybe we're right at the deadline now, but definitely get out and vote early. There's major issues that are on the ballot, and folks, these laws are not just created by Congress members and legislators; they're created by the people. So there's 2 referendum ballots. I hope people vote on issue 1, issue 2, and the participatory budgeting here in Cleveland. All of those need the support of people who care about democracy. And so we hope that people turn out and vote.
Say what's issue 1, issue 2, real quick?
I'm sorry. Issue 1 is the enshrining the right of abortion into the Constitution. That some Republicans are trying to get it off the ballot and change the percentage of the vote that we needed to pass a constitutional amendment, and then the legalization of marijuana. However you feel about either issue, I'm just saying vote. But that's something that's going to be on the ballot. Issue 2 is the marijuana. Issue 1 is enshrining the right of choice around the issue of abortion. And issue 38 is around, it's just Cleveland, participatory budgeting, giving people the right to impact some of the dollars that are coming through our taxes that impact their community. So all 3 of those represent areas for people to be more involved, more engaged. And so we hope people vote, get the information out. We'll put some information out about all 3 of those on our Facebook page, so you'll be able to look at those and compare for yourself which way you want to go. But we want people to look at those and know that their voice is needed on all 3 of those issues.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being on the show, Greg. I really appreciate learning about all of the stuff that your organization is doing. I appreciate you coming on the show. Everyone, again, to find out more information about today's show, you can go to nostaticradio.net on YouTube and watch this recording again. You can also go to BlackAnthropy.com, BlackAnthropy.com, and we have videos of this show, and we have videos of all the prior shows. Thank you so much for tuning in to BlackAnthropy today. Talk to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
My skin is black. Yeah, quite a show there. My from Chicago.
Yeah, I grew up right, like I said, right down the street on 48th and Drexel. Right. Come out Saturday morning. We see the street lined up.
BlackAnthropy on a station where we don't bring no static, but we sure enough bring the noise on staticradio.net. Make sure you check us out on social media where we absolutely love to hear from you on Facebook.com/No Static Radio, on X, formerly known as Twitter, at no static underscore radio, on Instagram at the real underscore no static radio, on YouTube at no static radio, and our newest platform discovered.tv, all the same, no static radio, all one word. And also don't forget, if you feel like donating to small businesses to help out journalism here on no static radio, with not just me but all of our show hosts, please don't hesitate to send us a cash app at No Static Radio, same thing, all one word. And for replays of this show and all others on the platform, please go to Mixler.com or Mixcloud.com. Just type in No Static Radio, all one word, in the toolbar for replays of this show and all others on the platform. You can just type in the name of the show and all of the shows will come up. So again, Mixler.com and Mixcloud.com. For continuous streaming uninterrupted, no refreshing the pages, to sit back, relax, and let it do its own thing. Check us out on TuneIn.com, LiveOnlineRadios.net, or MediaQ for continuous streaming uninterrupted again of this show and all others on the platform. And for all things No Static Radio, including up and coming events, merchandise, and an in-depth look at all our great show hosts here, please check out our website at www.nostaticradio.net. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and stay tuned. You know what it is, at 2 p.m. we got the Hustle and Wax Flow. Later on in the evening, followed by Drag Race and the Ultimate Sport, and then More Than Meets the Eye to close the night out. We also want you to remember that if you, a family member, or a friend have been affected by violence, know that it can affect your life in all types of ways. The way you eat, sleep, cause you to lose focus, for anger, afraid, or even use drugs or drinking as a way to escape. But we're here to tell you that the Trauma Recovery Center is here to help. Take control of your life. Today can be the day. The Trauma Recovery Center offers real help for real needs in real time. They offer services for food, clothes, safety, emotional support, and a whole lot more. So do not let violence control you. You can break free and TR seeking help. Give them a call. The number's on the screen if you're listening. 216-644-5487. They will come to you wherever you are. They offer real help for real needs in real time. And most importantly, they can give you the tools to rebuild your life and your health. Call today. They're free, they're 24/7 and confidential. So if you want out and don't know where to start, call the Trauma Recovery Center. The Trauma Recovery Center will help you take back your life after violence started today. Call today. Get the help you need today. 216-644-5487. The Trauma Recovery Center of Northeast Ohio, also affiliated with the Center for Families and Children. And again, we want to thank you. Make sure you check in again and check us out for the Hustle and Wax Flow at 2 p.m., followed by Drag Race and Ultimate Sport at 5, and at 7 p.m. More Than Meets the Eye. Until then, you know what it is. We've got more music for your listening pleasure here on Your Voice of the Revolution of staticradio.net. Powered by Google, partnered with Colors, and sponsored by Lamont Avenue Wines, designed exclusively, and the dedicated Senior Medical Center. Peace. All right.
No, I don't think so.